Good afternoon and welcome back, everybody. Or welcome for those who are joining us for the first time today. I want to again welcome you to the second day of the 11th annual Respectful Workplace Week event. This year's theme is psychological health and safety in the workplace. And just a couple of technical things before we jump into our afternoon's presentations. We're using Zoom today, but because of the size of the audience, everyone is being brought in, all the participants are being brought in, muted and with their video off. You are absolutely welcome to engage with questions and comments. Please feel free to do that over the chat or in the Q&A comment box. You can chat with myself or Nicole Smith. I'm the host for this afternoon or for today, or with Nisa or with any of the participants or with all the participants. We absolutely welcome comments. What we'll do, as we've been doing through all our presentations, is I'll monitor that chat and the Q&A box, and I will ask questions to our presenters at the end. I would like to also just remind folks, tomorrow there's a change in timing. We are actually going to start the third day, our session tomorrow at 9 a.m. instead of at 9:15, as is currently written on the agenda, because we ended up having a longer interview with the former commissioner on systemic racism than we had intended, and we didn't want to cut anything of it. We wanted to give you the benefit of the full interview. So instead of having a half an hour for that interview, we have a full 45 minutes now for that presentation. So it's a recorded interview that we did with Manju Varma because she couldn't be here for the presentation. So again, anyone who's coming tomorrow morning, we're starting at 9 instead of at 9:15. And if you can't come at that time, you're going to be able starting tomorrow to access that presentation or that video on the Please New Brunswick website. That's Public Legal Education and Information Services website. So that's all with the housekeeping. Now I'm so pleased to introduce to you our presentation for this afternoon, our first presentation. This presentation is on two-eyed seeing and cultural safety. And we are being presented today by Nisa Kennedy from JEDI. The Joint Economic Development Initiative, or JEDI, is an Indigenous organization dedicated to supporting Indigenous participation in New Brunswick's economy. JEDI began in 1995 as a tripartite partnership between the Indigenous communities in New Brunswick, the Government of Canada, and the Government of New Brunswick. In 2009, JEDI was incorporated as an independent nonprofit organization, and over the years, JEDI has grown into an Indigenous organization focused on working closely with its partners from Indigenous communities, organizations, government, and the private sector to foster Indigenous economic development in New Brunswick. Nisa Kennedy is a Wistihqueh woman from the Sedansik First Nations in New Brunswick. She has many years of community and urban experience with Indigenous youth focused on cultural initiatives. She prides herself on integrating Indigenous knowledge and practice into workforce development. As JEDI's Provincial Indigenous Employment Coordinator, she has the opportunity to share her knowledge and bring people together to understand the perspective of Indigenous peoples in the territory. She is experienced in advocation, Indigenous cultural awareness, and program development from Indigenous peoples from Atlantic Canada to Calgary, also known as Treaty 7, or also being within Treaty 7. Her passions are working with youth, Indigenous governance and leadership, and Indigenous capacity development. So Nisa, thank you so much for presenting to us this afternoon. I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. All right. I'm just going to share my screen and then we can get started. All right. Well, welcome. So we're going to be talking today about cultural safety and two-eyed seeing. So thank you for the warm introduction. It's my second time being here for the Respectful Workplaces Week, so I'm really looking forward to it. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the JEDI office is located in the traditional unceded territory of the Wistihqueh people. This territory and all of New Brunswick are covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Wolastoqiyik, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So a little bit about Jedi, and Nicole kind of talked about this already, but so we are a nonprofit that works with Indigenous communities here in New Brunswick. As Nicole mentioned, we are tripartite. We began as a tripartite organization between the Indigenous communities, the government of Canada, and the government of New Brunswick. But actually, in 2009, we were incorporated as an independent nonprofit organization. And over the years, we've expanded into different sectors of, programs and training, but ultimately our focus is developing economic development in Indigenous communities here in New Brunswick. So we do that through supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses, community economic development projects, workforce development, and partnerships with the public and private sector. So myself, I am the Provincial Indigenous Employment Coordinator. So I work quite closely with all of the Indigenous communities and their employment training officers. So working through, sharing employment opportunities and training and doing partnerships like that. So it's kind of one of the roles that I have here at Jedi. So I wanted to start off with a quote. If you're not sure who this man is, he is the Honorable Murray Sinclair. He's the former member of the Canadian Senate and the chairman of the Indian Residential Schools Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And he did that from 2009 to 2015. He had taken the lead on the recognition of the impacts that the Indian Residential School had and the Canadian government on Indigenous peoples throughout Canada. So before we begin discussing, cultural safety and two-eyed seeing, I wanted to share with you all the quote by the Honorable Murray Sinclair. Starting now, we all have an opportunity to show leadership, courage, and conviction in helping heal the wounds of the past as we make a path towards a more just, more fair, and more loving country. So I wanted to share that with you because we're here today to discuss psychological health and safety in the workplace. And I think this, really rings true to, all the facets of what it means to create a more psychologically safe and healthy environment for everyone. So it's up to us to champion that change in the workplace and to ensure that all people feel that they belong and that they're secure in where they're working. So I'm going to dive right into discussing the cultural safety, and I have some videos to share a video to share as well. And and we'll talk about two-eyed seeing. So what is cultural safety? The Public Health Agency of Canada defines it as an outcome based on respectful engagement that recognizes and strives to address power imbalances inherent in the healthcare system. And it results in an environment free of racism and discrimination and where people feel safe when receiving healthcare. Now, obviously, this is a reference to the healthcare system, but really this can be applied to any environment. And when we look at the psychological safety and health of individuals in the workplace, this still applies as there's those imbalances of power, racism, and discrimination there. And when those are prevalent, that's really where this creates an environment where individuals don't necessarily feel safe or heard. So for cultural safety, there's a few different things that really encompass what it means to be culturally safe. We're going to expand on this a little bit more, but there's 3 pillars for it, and it's cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, and cultural competence. So I'll go into that a little bit more, but really these are the things that are going to encompass cultural safety. And through becoming a culturally safe environment, you're going to be putting in work when it comes to anti-racism, cultural humility, and perhaps taking, a trauma and informed approach to how you operate your policies and engage with the individuals within your workplace, depending on the situations that are happening. So going on with what the Public Health Agency of Canada they had just released a report this past year on the continuum of cultural safety. So I'm going to kind of touch on that a bit today. Um, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I think it's a really great resource. Obviously, it's focused on the health sector. But like I mentioned, anywhere that people are going to be, these things are going to be important because we all come from different cultures, different values, and really we need to understand how we can all work together in that cultural collaboration there. So like I mentioned, there's three separate areas: cultural awareness, cultural competence, and cultural sensitivity. To achieve cultural safety, these are the areas that we need to meet first. And it's really not a one and done thing. This is going to take ongoing participation. And, it looks like, and that means looking at other methods to support individuals, such as taking a hard look at those workplace policies, taking a trauma-informed approach to handling workplace situations, and implementing anti-racism policies, training, and reflecting on the imbalances. Sorry, I'm trying to minimize the screen for the Zoom because it keeps popping up for me. There we go. The workplace situations, implementing anti-racism policies, and reflecting on the imbalances of power and systemic biases and privileges that exist. So this is really going to be an ongoing cycle that you're working through, right? Those things they're not going to go away. They're always going to be there, but it's really about how can we, mitigate those things that are happening. And then these are some ways that we can kind of get through that and create a more space where, there's room for collaboration. There's room to understand and respect other people's values and cultures. And it's not just about, Indigenous people. This is for all people because we all come from different areas of life and value systems and cultures and beliefs. So, how can we work together to understand that? And that's really where this comes down to. So, cultural awareness is really the first step when it comes to creating a culturally safe environment. It's the acknowledgement of difference. It's the first step in understanding those cultural differences, and it involves observing those differences. So cultural awareness focuses on the other and the other culture. So you don't necessarily consider the political or socioeconomic influences on cultural differences. You're just looking at, what is the history here? What are the things that are happening? It's awareness, right? That's what it comes down to. Um, so this is that first step. You see the differences around you and you're aware that they take place. And this is where, for Jedi, this is where we actually support, employers and organizations and businesses and in developing those skills, especially when working with Indigenous people. So we have our Indigenous Reconciliation Awareness module, and that's what it is. It's an awareness. It goes through the history and the history of Indigenous people in Canada, the current issues that are taking place. And it's not about, there is times where you reflect on your position in society and everything like that. But really this comes down to, okay, these are the facts and the things that have happened. And this is kind of what's going on right now. Then that's kind of where that cultural awareness piece comes in. But that doesn't necessarily mean that once you take something like that, like a cultural awareness training, that, it's all right, I did that and it's done. There's still other steps that need to happen to move towards reconciliation or move towards having a more culturally inclusive environment within a workplace. So cultural sensitivity is recognizing the need to respect the cultural differences. So it's one thing to be like, okay, I know that they're there, but how can I respect them and make sure that, you know, I'm reciprocating the type of approach that's necessary in order to engage with, this particular cultural group. And so that this is really where it comes down to the behaviors that are considered polite and respectful by the person of the other culture. So, like cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity, they focus on the other and the other culture. Cultural sensitivity is really about it doesn't necessarily, you're not reflecting on your own culture at this time. You're not doing any sort of internal work right now. You're trying to figure out how you can engage in a way that's appropriate with another culture. So, for example, this may mean, understanding that there's different protocols that are exhibited within another culture. So when you look at Indigenous communities, for example, when engaging with an Indigenous elder for a prayer or ceremony, which is something that does take place quite a bit, right? Like you do have organizations that want to invite an elder in to do an opening prayer or a land acknowledgement or things like that. So you may ask them for guidance or support or to come in to do this, to do that, and you would offer them tobacco or some other medicine as a sign of respect for their knowledge and for them to, come in to do that and share their wisdom with you. So it's being aware that other cultures are going to communicate, their value systems are going to be different, and acknowledging that and behaving accordingly. So that's really what cultural sensitivity is about. So you have the cultural awareness training, you know what the history is. The cultural sensitivity is okay. What are the protocols that are at place now? So what are the things that I do in order to communicate or engage with these individuals? And that's kind of how that works. And finally, there's cultural competency. And this is the ability to self-reflect. So you're looking at one's own cultural values. So you're looking internally, where do I sit in these, in this scheme of all these cultures and beliefs and society? Where do I sit in this? Am I a part of, a certain value system, or do I have an impact culturally? So these are some things to consider. So it's about continually learning to gain a deeper understanding of one another's culture, but it includes the ability to assess and respect the values and attitudes and beliefs of other people, but understanding, your own as well. So, okay, um, it's doing that internal work that needs to be done, understanding where you as an individual stand within your own value system and how that may or may not impact others culturally, right? So that's kind of so it's a continuum, right? These things are always going to be taking place and there's always going to be new things to learn. So you're always learning, you're always engaging and trying to, better the environment that you're working within. And like I mentioned, this goes for any culture. It's not necessarily this. I mean, obviously, we're coming from an Indigenous perspective, but these things can be, this is just in general terms, cultural sensitivity and support and competency. So one of the things that within the Indigenous community is that we have two-eyed seeing. And so I wanted to speak about not only the cultural safety, but the two-eyed seeing as well, because they really do go in hand, because two-eyed seeing at its core is about cultural collaboration and being able to balance different belief systems and values and being able to lean on one or the other at any given time. So Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall, who lives in the community of Eskasoni, Nova Scotia, in the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq, coined the English phrase two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing is the guiding principle found in Mi'kmaq knowledge as reflected in the language. So two-eyed seeing in Mi'kmaq is known as Eptawaptamunk. Two-eyed seeing is described as learning to see from one eye with the best or the strengths and the Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and learning to see from your other eye with the best or the strengths and the mainstream or Western knowledges and ways of knowing. And most importantly, learning to see with both these eyes together for the benefit of all. The Indigenous idea of two-eyed seeing supports a blended experience that respects and weaves together the strengths of both Indigenous and Western ways of knowing, being, and doing. So the two-eyed seeing approach inherently includes a fundamental respect for differing worldviews. So remember when we were talking about, what it means for cultural safety, two-eyed seeing at its core of what it means is to understand and value and respect multiple cultures and multiple values and belief systems, and being able to lean on those simultaneously and acknowledge where there may be common ground and maybe where one belief system maybe fits in more accordingly than another, and respecting those differences. So two-eyed seeing helps us recognize that the idea of wholeness through each separate whole eye. So when you think about it, you can kind of think of like, I always think of like a little googly monster or something. You got all these different eyes. These are all these different value systems, right? And so we're looking at, say, a circumstance or a situation, and we're all looking at it from different worldviews and different circumstances and different cultural beliefs, right? So that's kind of where this comes from. So you have to kind of sit back and be like, okay, what is my belief system? What is someone else's, and how are they, experiencing a certain situation or scenario, right? So to see things in a two-eyed seeing perspective, it's a means about understanding that we all have these different worldviews. We all are looking at the same thing differently. And for Indigenous perspectives, it's about this harmony that we can all work together. So it's inviting all of these eyes to work together in a collective and collaborative way. And they see this collision of realities to gain and understand the whole, so the whole circumstance for the benefit of the collective. So really this is about understanding we all have these different understandings of a situation or experiences in our cultures and beliefs, but how can we put that together to make sure that we're ensuring that everyone is being respected and valued in that same way? So one of the things with two-eyed seeing is that it actually came from um, wanting to approach the scientific, like the sciences, in a more Indigenous perspective, and respect the Indigenous knowledges that are at play when it comes to the scientific like studies in university. So Elder Albert Marshall worked very closely with the scientific community to come up with these ways and methods to ensure that two-eyed seeing, so both scientific knowledge and Indigenous knowledge, were respected when it came to working within the environment and different projects like that. So that's kind of where it came from. But then we've transformed it into these other areas of where it really can be approached and utilized in those ways. So we just this past year, Jedi was working on a project which was the Indigenous Reconciliation Indigenous Reconciliation Employer Action Plan. And one of the things that we were working through was how can you implement two-eyed seeing into the workplace? And that's kind of where the subject matter started to come up for us anyway here at Jedi, was how do we work together collaboratively? How do we, start to understand that these values and these belief systems are going to be there, like everyone has them, right? So how do we incorporate that into the workplace to ensure that Indigenous people feel that they're safe and welcomed within the workplace? So that was kind of where a lot of this stuff started to come up over the past few years, especially for the work that we're doing here at Jedi. So like I mentioned, two-eyed seeing, it's for Indigenous people, it's a guiding principle for cultural collaboration. It's really about the co-learning. Co-learning requires learning together with and from each other on an ongoing basis. So think of it as a weaving back and forth between knowledges. So we have to acknowledge that a lot of this work is not easy, and it's an ongoing journey of co-learning. It's both required and essential in order to develop the profound collaborative understandings and capabilities that two-eyed seeing encourages. So co-learning requires learning together with and from each other. Two-eyed seeing, sorry. In addition to encouraging intercultural collaboration, two-eyed seeing helps us to acknowledge the distinct and whole nature of Indigenous knowledge systems and our ways of knowing, being, and doing. And knowing, being, doing is represented as a whole eye alongside the distinct nature of the Western knowledge system. And this is also represented as a whole eye. So while we see these two eyes working together, think of how you how your eyes work and when you are using binoculars. So both eyes look through the lenses separately, but they work in harmony to observe reality. And that's what we need to think about when it comes to understanding these different perspectives. So it's like we're looking through our binoculars. So we need to understand that the learning is contextual, right? So we may be in that particular set of circumstances, choose to call upon the strengths of our Indigenous knowledge systems or other Indigenous science or knowledge systems. Whereas in another situation, it might be more important, more understanding to call upon, a Western knowledge system or another cultural value system, right? So that's where this whole weaving back and forth between knowledges comes in. So this will draw upon the abilities to meaningfully and respectfully engage in that matter. One of the quotes that the Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall recommends to this approach, he says he wants it to be pictured like sometimes we're moving a heavy sledge and this sledge represents our passion for ensuring the integrity of the nurturing wholeness of the earth and the well-being of our communities and the transmission of our Mi'kmaq culture and other Indigenous cultures and knowledges. So we, the elders, are dragging that sledge with all our might, and we need others to help us by pushing as hard as you can on the rear of the sledge. But it is we, the elders, who will determine where it goes. Other times, that heavy sledge represents a passion we elders hold that the Western sciences can help address. Then we, the elders, will help you Western scientists with that sledge. You drag, we push, while we all also constantly exchange understandings about where it is going and learn to abide by it. It's to Ilwaktamum, meaning to revisit, to renew, to maintain movement in the direction spirit intended. So the capacity to utilize two-eyed seeing, it's about, when we're talking about that continuum, when we're talking about two-eyed seeing, it's all about this capacity to make sure that we're constantly learning, we're constantly in movement and in direction. So we're constantly moving forward. And that's really what it comes down to when it comes down to cultural safety, Indigenous inclusion, reconciliation is how are we constantly moving almost like this throughout our time and working together collaboratively. So two-eyed seeing asks what we bring together in our different ways of knowing, being, doing, and to motivate the spirit in people, Indigenous people and in non-Indigenous people alike, to use all of our understandings so we can leave the world a better place and not compromise the opportunities for our youth. In the sense of 7 generations, through our own inaction, Mi'kmaq understandings are but one view in a multitude of Indigenous views similarly to other cultures and beliefs, and all the world's cultures, which include, so many different understandings to contribute to addressing, local to global challenges faced. So this is really about, there's multiple eyes that we can utilize, but we're just talking here today about two-eyed seeing, Indigenous and Eurocentric worldviews. But really, you could talk about 4-eyed seeing or 10-eyed seeing or 3,265-eyed seeing. It really can go on and on, right? But really, it's all about the extension, encompassing the understanding that all of us have the contributions to make, and there's opportunity for us to all have cultural collaboration. So as we're talking about, I think it was said 3,265 I'd seeing, it allows us to have these multiple opposing paradigms to coexist with one another in harmony. So it offers a more relational approach than one would altering one's view to accommodate bits and pieces, right? So we can take that awareness and that sensitivity and we can be able to expand that and be able to create this approach where we're understanding and collaborating with one another. So it allows us to have these multiple opposing paradigms to coexist with one another in harmony. While one of the problems that we kind of end up having, especially within the society that we have, is that we have this singular social order, and it ends up suppressing the diversity of other worldviews. And that's kind of the underlying difference between, our broader society and that of two-eyed seeing, is that two-eyed seeing at its core, like I've mentioned, it's about creating this collaborative approach. It's about having all of these, different paradigms and different value systems, but how can we take all of this and be able to respect and encourage all of those different ideas together? Because, when you force people to abandon their ways of knowing, their ways of seeing the world, you end up literally destroying their spirit. And once that spirit is destroyed, it is very difficult to embrace anything academically or through work or through sports, through arts. So that person is never complete. So to create a complete picture of a person, their spirit, their physical being, their emotions, their intellectual being, it all has to be intact and work in harmony. So that's why it's really important to create, that psychologically healthy and safe environment. And that's what happens in the workplace as well, is that you need to create all of these support systems in place and offer space for cultural collaboration and respecting of values and attitudes and beliefs. Because once we have one area that's not necessarily being respected or valued, it ends up impacting all these different areas for us in our lives as well. So that's why we need to make sure that these things are okay so that we can be whole, right? So when we talk about our spirit, that's what it means, is that it's our spirit. And if our spirit is broken, then we're not going to be okay. We're not going to have that, we're not going to be able to enjoy the things that maybe we once enjoyed. And that's where you see other impacts happen in people's personal lives as well. So I'm going to share a video. I just want to confirm that the audio works. I did make sure I shared my sound, but sometimes technology doesn't work great. Did the sound work? I'm going to assume it did.
How to adapt two-eyed seeing to the workplace. Originally developed as a grassroots program to encourage Mi'kmaq post-secondary students to pursue science education, two-eyed seeing has since been used in research projects with Indigenous people across a variety of disciplines. There is little scholarly information about two-eyed seeing approaches that have been researched and applied in Western working environments. The aim of this module is to employ the concept of two-eyed seeing to address barriers to employment by educating employers in New Brunswick on reconciliation and how they can create diverse, inclusive, and welcoming workplaces. These workplaces should provide Indigenous peoples with equitable opportunities to participate fully in the workforce and focus on confronting racism and discrimination-related barriers while promoting intercultural understanding. Elder Albert Marshall indicates that two-eyed seeing is not easy to convey to academics as it does not fit into any subject area or discipline. Rather, it is about life, what you do, what kind of responsibilities you have, how you should live while on earth. Two-eyed seeing is a guiding principle that covers all aspects of our lives: social, economic, environmental, and so on. The advantage of two-eyed seeing is that you are always fine-tuning your mind into different places at once. You are always looking for another perspective and better way of doing things. The unlimited potential of two-eyed seeing encompasses the understanding that all of our relations, past, present, future, have contributions to make when researching wise ways to apply two-eyed seeing in the workplace in contributing to healthy ecosystems and cycles in the working environment. Two-eyed seeing has the capacity to help shape efforts and gather emergent strategies around workforce development for First Nations communities across their territories and within the province of New Brunswick. The operationalization of two-eyed seeing in the workplace will engage First Nations to ensure our voices have been included in the collective mapping of our future careers through exploring past, present, and future approaches towards workforce development. To guide the process, the two-eyed seeing approach that incorporates a Western and Indigenous lens has the ability to blend new technologies, standards, and practices in a way that honors the whole person and their relationship with the land and with all of our relations. The development of this two-eyed seeing network, or web, can bring First Nations communities and non-Indigenous employers together to co-create a new pathway to ensure Indigenous peoples are successful in pursuit of future careers. There are new career opportunities on the horizon in clean technology, clean energy, natural resource extraction and processing, marine shipping, the built environment, and manufacturing. We want to ensure that First Nations people on their territory and in New Brunswick are at the table when these new careers arrive. The other thing I want to add is that employers have to take the time and they have to make a dedication and they have to make it a priority for themselves to learn. You can't just get away with hiring an Indigenous person and saying, here, you be the liaison and you make this happen. That's not two-eyed seeing. It needs to be embedded in the whole culture of the work. And the thing is, if your workforce, if your workplace, if your organization adopts two-eyed seeing, it's not just Indigenous people that are going to benefit. All people will benefit. And New Brunswick has an ever-changing demographic of people. This is going to be in the best interest of employers, and especially for New Brunswick as a government and a province, to attract and retain the best of the best.
Oh. So that's one of the videos that I shared with you that is from our two-eyed seeing that we're creating as a module for training for developing two-eyed seeing in the workplace. That was a project that we did in collaboration with Innovation 7 and Stephanie Francis, and we actually had the okay from Elder Albert Marshall to discuss everything and make sure that everything was good on his end. So I'm getting close to wrapping up here, but I wanted to kind of discuss really what it means for two-eyed seeing and cultural safety. And really at the core of everything, it's about having that respect and value for other people's experiences, their attitudes, and their beliefs, and providing that space for that cultural collaboration. And it is in the best interest for everyone, not just Indigenous people, not just, this is for everyone that's here, because we're all going to have to work together. We all live and work together. So these are the things that are going to create that space that is healthy and safe and secure for everybody. The other thing that I wanted to talk about as well is the National Indigenous Economic Strategy for Canada. So this was released in 2022, and it calls to Economic Prosperity 30, which is engage Indigenous advisors to help Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations evaluate workplace practices, strategies, measure and monitor workplace inclusion strategies, and provide inclusive workplace training and undertake system reviews of strategies. And all public and private employers adopt the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action number 57, which is educate public servants on Indigenous history. So that's that cultural awareness part, right? And number 92, which is corporate sector adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So I wanted to add that in there because these are things that my organization, JEDI, can assist with. These are things where we do cultural awareness training. We do collaborate and partner with employers, but we do a lot when it comes to workplace strategies that are looking to provide more inclusion practices within their workplace. So these are some things that myself and others here at JEDI can assist with. I wanted to end it on another quote by the Honorable Marie Sinclair, and it's the road we travel is equal in importance to the destination that we seek. There are no shortcuts when it comes to truth and reconciliation, and we are forced to go the distance. So that means it's up to us to make those changes, right? So we need to work together collaboratively in order to make those substantial changes. And it's up to us to create that path for us, for ourselves, but also for the future generations too. And this is just my contact information. If anyone had any questions after the fact or would like to reach out to me about any other subjects matter, my email is right there. But other than that, I'll leave it up here for a minute and or if you're able to put that into the chat, that might be easier. And then I can end the slideshow there.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Goodness, I'm sorry. Sometimes my headphones are finicky. So we've just put your email address in the chat to everybody. So folks who are participating today can access you. They can send you, they can email you if they'd like. I'm gonna open up our first set of questions. We have Waliwan, Nisa, much appreciated. So there's some thanks for the presentation. It's always really exciting to hear from Jedi. I think you're such an exciting and innovative organization. There were some really interesting terms going through your presentation, things like cultural humility, which I'm new to. And it's so interesting to start really putting those thoughts together in our heads. How do we take things like white privilege and think about them from a sense of cultural humility? So a question that I have for you as we're waiting for folks. Oh, are we still struggling to hear me?
No, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just saw someone in the chat say they couldn't. Okay, so we have a second. Sonia Pearly says, no question, just thank you for the presentation. Excellent information. So so you said you're developing this two-eyed seeing training series for employers. I know that your awareness series seems to be incredibly popular. What is your hope for this two-eyed seeing presentation or two-eyed seeing series that you're putting together?
Well, when you talk about, the continuum of cultural safety, right? That's what we're trying to implement for us. We want to have things that are for the cultural awareness, which is the IRAM. But what do you do after? Because that's what really ends up happening. That was a lot of the feedback we were getting after IRAM was like, this is great. Now I have this information, but what do I do with it? So, that's where we started working on doing the two-eyed seeing and we're hoping to have it ready this fall. And I'm also working on some anti-racism and unconscious bias training as well. So these are going to be for how do we know the history, but now we got to dissect kind of where we stand with all of that. And that's kind of what it comes down to. So that's where the hope is that we're continuing that cycle of change, right? So not just the awareness, but how can we implement these things within our workplace, within ourselves too, right? So that's kind of where all this is coming from. And that's the hope, is that we're going to expand all the trainings that we offer, and it'd be kind of like a phased approach for people. So you do one, then you do the other. So you kind of have to do it that way. But yeah, that's kind of the hope and the plan for it.
It sounds like with the training you're developing, it's about bringing people through that cycle that you were through, that circle you were talking about bringing people down to having, culturally safe workplaces.
That's absolutely what it is about. Because like I mentioned, it's you have to do that outer work where you're understanding the other, but then you have to go like once you're like, okay, I get what's going on to everybody, but now what can I do internally? How can I change those biases that I have? Because we all have them, right? And we're always going to have them, but how can I stop it from affecting how I interact with people?
Absolutely. I think, you're right. Once you've learned the history, once you've done the exercise, whether it's a Kairos blanket exercise, a Jedi awareness training, all of those really incredible material that is available, you're right. Then how do we sit with ourselves and start looking at what is it that I'm unintentionally doing or unintentionally bringing to the workplace that is impacting other people?
Mhm.
And how do I then take action to change that? Once I've recognized it, how do I change that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what's going to create that significant change within the workplace. And it's not just about, it's really for all cultures and because that's what the future is, right? We all come from different backgrounds and different histories. So how can we make sure that we're creating a safe environment for everyone as a whole so that we can all respect and value and be able to have that collaboration that's key, right? For any work that we do.
Absolutely. We had just before lunch, we had Ivan Okello from the New Brunswick Multicultural Council presenting on their anti-racism toolkit. And when he was going through the different modules or the different materials, the different modules in their training and the different material in their toolkit, step one was understanding, learning about Turtle Island. It was about learning about the history within Canada amongst settlers and Indigenous peoples and being aware of that piece before you moved into racism that exists in other ways in and around other communities of color in the province. And I think it's really interesting that this is the same, that you're saying in order to make it safe for anyone, we have to make it safe for everyone.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Nisa as we move forward? Great, Nisa, thank you so much for coming and presenting to us a second time. I'm really excited about the material you guys are putting together. I can't wait to take it. Um, how will people know when you are rolling out this two-eyed seeing training?
So we do have so if you go to our Jedi website, you can click to be on our like our mailing list, and that's where we'll be sharing all that information, or you could of course follow on social media as well. But I would definitely encourage the mailing list, and then you stay up to date with all of our projects, our programs that we have going on.
And your website is jedi.ca?
JediNB.ca. Yeah.
JediMB.ca. There, I've put that in the chat too for folks so that they can reach out. I think I'm pretty sure I signed up to your newsletter at the end of our last session, at the end of our session last year. I want to
Yeah.
make sure everyone else who's interested in this material signs up as well. Again, Nisa, thank you so much for your time. Jedi has been so great to us, giving us this much of your time today and last year. We really appreciate it.
Oh, I always love it. Thank you for having me.